The Cure Chronicles is delighted to welcome Matt Webster to the show. Matt is a UK-based HIV/AIDS advocate, HIV prevention educator, and a vlogger. In 2011, Matt was diagnosed with HIV. He decided to start sharing his story online in an effort to give others hope when navigating the challenges of living with HIV. Today, Matt is dedicated to using his knowledge, experience, and acceptance of his HIV status to help challenge misunderstandings and stigma around HIV through social media, volunteering, and having open conversations.
Matt, I'd like to thank you for joining me on the Cure Chronicles today.
Hi, Jeff. It's really nice to meet you, and thank you so much for inviting me to take part in this. It's really exciting thing for me to do.
Thank you. And really, the pleasure's all ours. And I really love to get to meet people that are dealing with their HIV diagnosis. And I think that, everybody has something to share about their experience that's valuable to the whole community. A big concern of mine is the level of stigma surrounding HIV. And I think that brave folks like you that are willing to, speak out and help to break the mythology around HIV and talk about the reality is really helpful for people to deal with this. And there's so many people dealing with it, and it's less scary and less limiting than a lot of people think. And also there's a reason to know your status. And I think, that's something that escapes the general public. But, let's start with you. And, I understand that you were diagnosed in 2011 for having HIV. What was your situation at that point? Were you having some sort of symptoms of the disease, or was it just coincidental that you happened to find out?
So I got diagnosed in November 2011, and basically it came about because I was sick for about a week, and I had what was kind of flu-y like symptoms, maybe kind of like a bad cold or something like that. So I had kind of aches and pains, a bit of fever, and I just generally felt quite unwell. And it wasn't until quite late into the week when I developed like this rash down my arm. I kind of thought it looked a bit like something like meningitis. So I was kind of, that's kind of when the worry started. At first I wasn't gonna worry too much. It was like, I've got a cold or I've got a flu, or just kind of
right.
have some Lemsip and get through it, really.
Right. We all get them, right? Yeah, we just suffer for 10 days or whatever, and then we're fine, right?
Yeah, that's it, exactly. And but when I got the rash, I was kind of like, this is something else going on. I wonder what's going on. So I immediately went to my GP, who kind of checked me over and just did a few quick tests and things like that. And she was like, this does look like meningitis, so I'm going to get you straight into hospital. So straight after the appointment, they rushed me into hospital. They admitted me onto the ward, got me hooked up to a cannula and things like that. And then they kind of took a lot of blood. Didn't really fully explain exactly kind of what they were testing for, so I still didn't really have any idea apart from meningitis. And I was in hospital for kind of most of the evening. I got a nice little meal when I was there, and then they discharged me, said it's not meningitis, but we'll run these tests and we'll kind of get back to you and let you know what it is, what's happened. And I think it was about a week or two after being discharged that I got a call asking me to go back into the hospital. And at that point, it was the tropical or the infectious diseases clinic. So at that point, then the brain was overrunning then, and I was kind of wondering, what have I got? What's going on? So I went into my appointment and got my results, and they just explained that it was asked if I'd been tested for HIV before, and I hadn't, because I'd only come out as gay about 8 months-ish beforehand. So I didn't really know a huge amount about it. I didn't really know much about testing or even STI testing at that point. So I hadn't ever thought of getting tested. And he kind of broke the news to me that one of the tests that they'd run as part of my admission into hospital was for HIV, and then the result would come back positive at that point.
Yeah, so it actually sounds, not that dissimilar to, a large part of the population. They do find it that way because they don't test, even if they think there's some possibility of exposure. And I think anybody that's sexually active, has some level of potential exposure. After that, basically, you had a little bit of time to think about this before you start to getting into advocacy. Because my understanding is that you started making videos around 2020. Can you tell us a little bit about, what motivated you to do that, and tell us a little bit about the kind of advocacy or the kind of information that you were putting out?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there was quite a long gap there from 2011 to 2020. So I released my first video was for World AIDS Day in December 2020, and that's the kind of first time I'd really talked publicly about my diagnosis. And I think it's something that I'd kind of always wanted to do. Once I kind of got through my initial stigma and my initial kind of challenges of being diagnosed, it was something I kind of really wanted to do and talk a bit more publicly about it. But I'd never really had the confidence to do it. And I think kind of what triggered me into actually making that step to talk publicly was a breakup with my ex-partner. And I was just kind of in a challenging place. It was quite a long relationship, and that kind of just triggered me into kind of thinking about my life and where do I want it to go, what do I want to do. And I've always been kind of a supporter of World AIDS Day, and gone to different events, including like the memorial. Like we did like a candlelit vigil by the AIDS Memorial here in Brighton, and I was kind of like, I just really want to do something and give something back. And I just had this idea in my head of making a video just talking about my diagnosis and my experiences with it. I didn't have many kind of expectations for it. I just kind of wanted to just share my experience and just hope that maybe even just one person would see it and kind of realize that living with HIV isn't such a life-destroying thing, really.
Oh, I think that's a great theme. And we hear that a lot on the Care Chronicles, that, once people really get an opportunity to think about it, and sometimes when they, sometimes they have to be a little bit bold or sort of take a leap of faith and start to share their diagnosis with others and to see where their support system is, that they find out that, living with HIV isn't that different than living without HIV.
Yeah.
That the pills are, not that toxic, that you live a relatively normal daily life. And, it seems like some of the most difficult part of the diagnosis of HIV is that isolation, when people don't feel comfortable, sharing this information with their friends and family and being open about it. And that really comes from the stigma surrounding HIV, that it's a kind of a scary thing to people that don't understand HIV, that don't have HIV. I mean, okay, so, give me a hallelujah on this, or a yes or no, if this is your understanding as well. But my understanding is, if you're down at undetectable, you're not contagious. You're no more likely to give it to somebody else than somebody who doesn't have HIV giving it to somebody else. That's remarkable, right? I mean, that can actually normalize even your intimate relationships. And so it's really different than, when I was back in college, and the amazing fear of, having that and realizing that you had either a secret, or you had something that you would tell that might scare everybody away from you, right? And it's interesting to have these conversations, because I guess the more people that understand that situation, the more normal it can become, living with HIV, which is so it's great that you decided to come out. Do you mind, come out about your diagnosis? Do you mind me asking you about what do you think why did it take you 8 years? Were you just having such a great relationship and you never really thought about it? Or was there anything that was holding you back at the time?
That's a good question. It's difficult to kind of really pinpoint exactly what it was that stopped me, whether it's the kind of just my own kind of personal confidence and kind of being in a relationship and just going through the kind of normal day-to-day life. So I think it was it's maybe even just becoming so comfortable with it that like you kind of mentioned earlier, it's a very normal day-to-day life, right? I take just one pill a day in the evening, and that's it. I go for tests every 6 months, and that's it. So it's a really kind of small part of my life in terms of the kind of management and, you know, the clinical side of things. There's not, you know, a huge amount there. So I think, you know, maybe just becoming comfortable with it, becoming comfortable with life, and just kind of getting on with it, really. I think it just really took that, you know, that kind of big life event, which was the breakup, to kind of just push me a bit further into kind of learning more about myself, and again, kind of where I wanted to go, and, you know, the person that I wanted to be, really.
Yeah. So it sounds like it just took time, right? You just kind of got used to it, and then you realized it wasn't, you know, you put it in perspective, and you still get tested regularly. That's interesting. So, you know, what is the purpose of that, right? If you're taking your pill every day, you know, so people still do go get tested a couple times a year, I guess, it sounds like. And you know, what's the purpose of that?
Yeah, sure. So get tested every 6 months. It's just blood tests and the kind of normal sexual health screen that I get every 6 months as well. So the test. So here in the UK, they used to test the CD4 count, which is the white blood cell count in your body. Now they don't really do that anymore unless your viral load changes. So that's another thing the test is for, viral load, which is the amount of virus that's in your blood. And they also check for things like, you know, liver condition, things like that. You know, although the meds that aren't as toxic as they used to be, you know, there can still be a bit of an effect on your body. So, you know, checking creatinine levels, things like that, just to kind of, you know, make sure everything's in check. And just, you know, general kind of, you know, health checks, and, you know, once a year to check my weight, my blood pressure, and just keep a really good, you know, a good eye on things. I recently saw some research that was talking about people with HIV being diagnosed with certain things earlier than people that don't live with HIV. And actually the result of that was that because people living with HIV get tested more frequently and get checked on more frequently, then, you know, a lot of these things are found earlier in people living with HIV than people that don't live with HIV, just because of the, you know, the kind of routine testing every 6 months, really.
It's amazing, because as you were talking about how you take, you know, normal management of your health, it made me realize you're doing a better job monitoring your health than I'm doing monitoring my health. I think that is great, and that makes perfect sense that, you know, you're getting these checkups, and that's driven a little bit by the fact that you can potentially get some toxicities that are quite rare. And then I guess they just would adjust your drugs in that case. So it's not like that's a big deal. Some liver enzymes are off, and they're like, hey, why don't you go on this version of it instead, and then adjust it. And it still works the same way, right? Because your viral load is so low that you're considered undetectable, right?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I mean, you know, there's times when, you know, things start to go a little bit wrong, and they can, you know, change the treatment, change the meds. You know, myself, I started taking tripler when I got diagnosed. You didn't used to start taking treatment straight away. You used to wait until your CD4 count started to drop. When it was kind of slowly going down, or it was below 350, that at that point was when they would start treatment. So when I started treatment, which is about 3 years after I got diagnosed, I started on a pill called a tripler, which was quite strong. At the time, I had quite a few side effects from it. And, you know, not everyone does. It's quite a rare experience to have some side effects from it. And I think I was on a tripler for about 6 to 8 months before they changed me across to Stribild, which is what I take now, and I've taken ever since, and I've had absolutely no problems with it. So yeah, you know, when things start to kind of go a little bit awry, then, you know, they can change the meds and just kind of get things, you know, back on track. You know, occasionally you'll have, like, you know, a spike in your viral loads, and, you know, just, you know, going every 6 months is just a really good way that they can keep an eye on things, make sure everything's going smoothly, and yeah, that everything is being kept in check.
And how invasive is a HIV test? You know, like when they test your viral load, or test, you know, how much blood do they have to take?
So usually I think it's like between 4 and 6 like little vials of blood. But this, I don't know if this sounds weird or not, but I quite enjoy going to the clinic and going for my appointments. The nurses and doctors there are just, you know, absolutely amazing. They have a good laugh with you and just make you really feel like at ease, and almost it feels like a second home to me almost.
That's fantastic. Like that further, you know, normalizes a very normal situation. It is really nice, so these are people that are happy to see you, that are, kind of service providers sort of showing you some love, quite frankly. I mean, we could all use, doctors' experiences like doctors' appointments like that. Sometimes I don't know if this is sometimes the case in the UK, but in the United States, sometimes they have to really rush you in and out. So you never really get a chance to get some human interaction. But it sounds like the HIV clinics are really tuned to that. And so the blood draw is not a big deal. And so I know you're an advocate for testing, and certainly managing your health has huge benefits like this. Are there other reasons for people to get tested? What if they don't know whether or not they have HIV? There's a big fear of finding out. And I think you've sort of said already that, well, it didn't turn out to be as big a deal as you might have imagined. I don't know if you have anything to say about that, but, what other, when you're talking to other folks in your community or your friends or family or whatever, what sort of things do you say about testing in general?
I think the biggest thing when I'm kind of talking about testing is how simple and easy, quick it is. For most, kind of initial HIV tests, it's just like a finger prick blood test, which takes minutes. But it's one of the most important.
Even much less than your visit to the doctor that you described. Oh, so that's like nothing. A finger prick test. Yeah. So a drop of blood is enough. Wow, amazing. So that's not very invasive at all. But what about the fear factor? What would, is there anything that you can do that would encourage people to find out their status? Is it the right thing to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think for people that are sexually active, no matter kind of what sexuality or gender you identify as, I think it's testing is vital. We have goals to end new HIV transmissions by 2030, and the only way that you can really do it, at present is by regular testing, is by people getting tested. So it's so important, because if you don't know your status, and I think the figures are that around 20% of people that contract HIV don't get any symptoms. If you don't test, you don't know what your status is. It's you could be passing it on, without knowing anything really. I think it's for a really quick test which takes a few minutes, it's so worth it.
Yeah, and you can do something really. What you're doing is you're doing something positive for humanity, right? Because you brought up the goal of ending transmission by 2030, right? And if everybody knows their status, we could, reduce their transmission, to nearly zero at that point, right? Because if all they need to do is get on meds, suppress the virus, and go back to their normal lives without the fear of accidentally passing it to somebody else. Is there anything else that you would share with people that might, be dealing with some of the things that you were dealing with upon your diagnosis, or as you were thinking about it and deciding whether to, come out about it, and, in terms of managing your relationships and managing your health? I mean, you have the mic. Tell me what's on, tell me anything you can think of.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, where to start really? You kind of touched on earlier that it can be a really isolating experience, but it really can be. It can be one of the most isolating experiences ever. When I first got diagnosed, I felt the most isolated I've ever felt. I kind of went completely in on myself. I didn't feel like anyone else was, going through the same thing. But there's hundreds of thousands, there's millions of people across the world that are going through the same thing. And for me, what kind of really helped me to kind of get over that was, kind of give myself a bit of time to obviously let the news sink in a little bit. It's quite, it was quite a big shock. It was quite scary at the time. And there was a lot of worries and concerns. But for me, kind of what really helped was just researching, just reading, talking to my doctors. I eventually got to know a friend that was positive as well, and just talking to him and kind of talking through, his experiences, and just kind of learning about how, he deals with, his diagnosis, and, how simple it is to kind of live with HIV. I think that was one of the biggest things that really kind of helped me kind of move forward in life from a point where I didn't think it was going to continue for much longer, just to kind of really understand I think I probably went in a bit too much detail, but I think just to really understand, how HIV works and how the treatment works, and the success of the treatment, and how great it is, and how quickly you can go from being detectable to undetectable. I speak to people, quite a lot of people reach out to me online and through social media, and kind of talk to me that they're struggling, they've just been diagnosed, they're really struggling, or they're worried. And people from across the world kind of reach out to me. And one person I spoke to regularly started taking treatment, and within 2-3 months he was undetectable. So it's amazing how quick modern treatment does work. And as I kind of mentioned earlier, that the kind of management of it is so simple. 1 pill a day. There's not a huge amount of kind of different factors around taking the meds. I need to take mine with food, but some you don't, some you do. Generally have to take it around the same time every day. But it's such a taking 1 pill, or maybe even 2 pills, a couple of pills, is not is not a hard thing to do. And I remember, I'd take my meds out with me if I was meeting friends or going for dinner, and I'd used to go and like hide when I needed to take my meds. Because obviously I need to take it with food. So if I was kind of out around dinner time, then I'd go and hide somewhere, or kind of take it on the sly without people noticing. This was before I kind of started talking publicly. But now, again, just kind of from talking to people, from understanding more and more about how HIV works, and the kind of the prognosis, which is absolutely fantastic now. Just now I don't care. I'll just kind of get it out and I'll take my pill, and with everyone
might even start a good conversation when you think about it, right? Because I was just thinking, listening to you, and you were saying that you met somebody who was going through the same thing, and you got a chance to discuss it with him. How do you broach that subject at first, right? Did that person just mention it to you, and then you were like, well, I guess I can admit it to him as well, and then you had a great conversation? Or did you actually search around for somebody to talk to? And
no, so it was the kind of the first guy that I talked to was a friend of my ex-boyfriend, and I think my ex must have told him about my diagnosis, and was like, can you speak to Matt and kind of help him out a little bit? And so that's kind of how that started. And yeah.
Do they sometimes ask you why is that? Why are you taking a pill?
And to be honest, no, because I've usually kind of told them about it before. If I'm taking it around friends, I can't think of a friend of mine that doesn't know about my status. So yeah,
that's cool. And it's just like, so there's within your local community, it sounds like there's zero stigma surrounding this.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, actually. There's sort of in my circles, there's little to no stigma. There was, when I kind of first was diagnosed, first started talking about HIV. And I'm not saying stigma isn't a really kind of bad, negative thing. It's just people that don't necessarily understand now how HIV works, and what the prognosis is like now. But yeah, there was some challenges to go through in kind of telling people, and then having to kind of almost feel like I needed to back myself up and say, listen, actually it's not a thing, don't worry. That's the kind of minority of times, really. Most of the people I've talked to have been really good about it. It's more kind of it's been in my head, and I've been kind of worried, and like, what people are going to think of me when they find this out, and what people are going to say about it, and will they start talking behind my back, and will I lose friends over it? But fortunately, nothing like that's happened. So it's been really positive experience.
That's really another thought that I have listening to you, is that one of the things that you did is you decided to understand how HIV works, and to get more, sort of almost like scientific details about it. And that gave you more confidence in speaking to people about it, which I think is a good thing. So, at least you knew what you were talking about if they had a question, which is, that's great. I wonder, is that something anybody can do, or do you just have a knack for it? Because the other thing that struck me is that you looked at a rash on your arm and thought that maybe you had meningitis. And I'm like, how many people would know what meningitis looks like? Did you go to the internet looking at rashes until you were like, oh, there's the one I have on my arm? Looks like, because then you went down to the clinic and they were like, yeah, it does look like meningitis. Come on in. That was just impressive. Are you a doctor? What's the story?
No, I'm not in any medical profession. I work in HR, so it's obviously very different. Yeah, I mean, it's weird because I remember growing up in school and watching TV and seeing we used to have like public information adverts about meningitis where they'd say if you've got a rash and you kind of roll a glass, press a glass against it, and if the rash doesn't disappear, it's possibly meningitis. And I remember that. Yeah, I don't know. It's a kind of memory that stuck with me. I don't know why it kind of stuck in my head from being a kid. But yeah, and interestingly, where there was that much education on, and this is probably going off on a complete tangent here, but where there was that much information about things like meningitis, there was never the same around HIV or sexual health. It was such a taboo subject growing up, and like I kind of touched on earlier, I didn't know anything about HIV when I got diagnosed, apart from what I'd seen and heard, growing up, and people were, obviously getting really ill and unfortunately dying from HIV, from AIDS. And so it was only those kind of stigmatizing views that I had in my own head at that point. Nothing kind of positive or, constructive was in my head. It was just a kind of, this is the most awful thing that's ever happened kind of thing.
If you don't mind me prying into your, somewhat personal stuff here, but why did you come out, right around 2011, 2010?
Sure. Yeah. So I've known that I was gay since I was about 9 years old. So I was born in 86 and I'd always known it, but kind of so I'm not originally from Brighton here in the UK. I used to come from the Lake District, which is a little bit further up north in a really kind of small village. And it was, I think mainly just the kind of worry about, people's views on it and, being scared of actually coming out and just not being ready to kind of make that leap. I kind of wrestled with, with those thoughts in my head for however many years that was until I was 20, 24. And, there's so many times where, I went to uni in the northeast of England and I didn't come out there, even though I kind of knew, some of the people that were gay as well, and had some kind of some friends that were, friends of friends that were gay, but I never kind of felt right to do it until that point. And, when I left uni, I moved back to my parents. And I kind of moved with the thought in my head that I'm gonna, ignore these gay thoughts. I'm gonna be straight. I'm gonna find a girlfriend. I'm gonna have a family. I'm gonna live happily ever after. But as time went by, I just realized that that's not what it is. I can't just change it. That's me. And kind of once I'd realized that, it was time to do it. And it felt right at that point to do it. I was in a good place in my life, and I was making lots of new friends, and I was like, this is time to do it. And then about I think about 4 or 5 months after I came out, I moved down to Brighton, which is a lot more accepting, a lot more friendly than where I was previously.
But you still did it where you were in the less gay friendly environment. And was it as bad as you thought it was going to be when it became open? Yeah. So it was another experience that you had where you took a brave leap of faith and it worked out. Yeah, very interesting. Well, look, that's, I think, a really interesting part of your backstory as well. And I really appreciate you sharing that with me. Anyway, this has been a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. Yeah. I hope other folks listening in got a chance to get to know a little bit about you and enjoyed your story as well. I'm sure they did. So thank you so much for being with me today. And
no, thank you, Jim.
We'll see you again sometime.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me on. It's been amazing. Thank you.